Judges 6, and I start from verse 11. We can keep it open as we look through that text for this morning. Judges chapter 6, beginning from verse 11. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak of Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, and his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty warrior." And Gideon answered him, "But sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our ancestors recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has cast us off and given us into the hand of Midian." Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. I hereby commission you." He responded, "But sir, how can I deliver Israel? My clan is the weakest of Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord said to him, "I will be with you, and you shall strike down the Midianites, every one of them." Then he said to him, "If I have found favor with you, then show me a sign that it's you who speak with me. And do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you." And he said, "I will stay with you until you return." So Gideon went into his house and prepared a kid and an unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour, and the meat he put it in a basket, and the broth he put it in a pot, and brought them to him under the oak and presented them. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on this rock and pour out the broth." And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and unleavened cakes. The fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. Then Gideon perceived that it was the angel of the Lord, and Gideon said, "Help me, Lord God, for I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace be to you. Do not fear. You shall not die." Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, "The Lord is Peace." Jehovah Shalom. To this day, it still stands at Ophrah, which belongs to the Abiezrites. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to
Thanks
God.
be to God. God, we give you thanks this morning as we open your word. And Lord, in the preaching of your word, may you catch really a glimpse of you, God. Because there's so much that you have to offer this morning. Maybe not to the sermon, but God, when we come to your table, when you will remind us, oh God, that you gave your very best to us. So God, we ask your blessing. Catch us by surprise. We thank you for doing this. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. 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 Please be seated. Last time, if you've been following what we've been doing for these past few weeks, is we've been going through the names of God. So we started with El Shaddai, and then we went to Jehovah Shammah, and then we went to Jehovah Jireh, and today I want to talk about Jehovah Shalom. Jehovah Shalom. This is probably the only instance, in all of Scripture, both the Old and the New, that this word is used, Jehovah Shalom. So I just wanted to pick on this passage a little bit here and there, and I will offer it to you, and may God speak to you through this one. If you look at the Judges, if you see how the book is arranged, it's after the people of Israel had come out of bondage. They have traveled this 40 years in the wilderness and finally ends up in the promised land. And then they are now begun, they are no more like a nomad. So far they have been just going from one place to the other, putting their tents, and they're going from there. But now God is giving them a place and they are trying to settle down. That's where we begin the book of Judges. When I see, just bear with me, and I say, because this is very important, and you kind of get distracted, so many things that are going on, but just hang with me, because I just want to make a point here and there, and then we will close. If you see the Judges, there is what I call it's a pattern that kind of resembles your and my rhythm of life. Let me tell you very simply what that means for me. Maybe you might agree with me. This is how our rhythm, your life and my life goes. In human condition, this is what happens. There is a crisis. Is that right? There is a crisis in our lives. And oftentimes what happens is we try to solve the crisis by our own strength. Because you and I are smart people. You and I have enough technology with us. You and I know enough of the problem. So we try as much as we can to solve these problems. Just several years ago, I was sitting down with my brother-in-law and we were looking at something, and we looked at a problem, and in about 5 minutes, he gave me 10 options of how that problem can be solved. Is that right? This is how our lives work. Your life and my life, crisis happens in our lives, and immediately, by instinct, we immediately look at how can we solve the problem by the strength that we have, by the intellect that we have. And then what happens is our life gets a little bit more complicated. The crisis gets a little bit more complicated. When the crisis gets complicated and when it's beyond our solution, what we do is to cry to God for help. If you and I have an understanding there is a higher power in our lives, yes? If you and I believe in this higher power that is able to do, second thing that we do in the midst of our crisis is we cry for help. I don't know if you do. I do. I do. Because oftentimes, I also try to solve problems with my own strength. And then when it goes beyond me, I look up to God and I say, God, deliver me from this crisis. And so God slowly begins to move those mountains. Is that right? Begins to move those mountains. We come against a wall, and when we find there is no way out, God begins to break down those walls. Because the God that you and I worship begins to do amazing things when our lives are up against the wall. I'm being very serious because oftentimes when I'm really against the wall, when I have nowhere to turn, look at the way the people of Israel are at the Red Sea. There's a sea in front of them, unable to conquer, and they look back and there's a whole army behind them. Is that right? And then God says to Moses, no, touch it. Use that stick that you have. Just use it. Do it. Is that right? And then it begins to break. When you are up against the wall, it begins to do something, isn't it? That's the God that you and I worship. It's happened to me, it's happened to you. Acknowledge it sometimes. Amen. You can do that too. So what happens is we are in a crisis, we cry for help, and then the third part of your life and my life is there is a deliverance. Is that right? God begins to open up and the new possibilities open up, and then we begin to walk. And the last part is what gets us. Because now that we are out of it, we become complacent. Complacency sets into our lives. I'm okay now. The next time a crisis happens, I can call on God. For now, I'm okay. If you look at the pattern in Judges, that's exactly what happens. They are in a crisis, they call to God, and they try to solve in between. And when it gets overwhelming, what they do is, they look up to God. The God that you and I worship is not a God who says to the people of Israel, guess what? You didn't come to me before, I'm not going to help you. The God that you and I believe is so gracious, absolutely gracious. He looks to me and to you and he says, let's go. I'm going to do a new thing in your life. It begins to open up. And then the people are delivered from the crisis. And after that, what happens? That's okay. I'm fine. And I keep going on in my life. The danger is the last part of our lives. Somehow, this is what I believe, somehow the God that you worship, the one I worship, sometimes brings a little bit of our crisis into your life and into my life so that we become dependent on this God. Sometimes the crises are our own. We create the crisis on our own. Sometimes God puts that little bit of a twist in our lives so that He wants to get your attention and my attention. That's where we begin Judges 6. Midianites are not strangers to the people of Israel. If you go back in Genesis and you read, Abraham gets married to a woman called Keturah. And the descendants that come out of Keturah are the people of the Midianites. Is it right? So they're not strangers. In fact, they are cousins to the people of Israel. So Midianites, and if you want a little bit more reference, remember the time that Moses runs away after he kills somebody? And he goes into the land of Midian and he marries somebody. And you know who the father-in-law is? Who is he? The priest of the Midianites. And when people were wandering after God brings them out of Egypt and they wander for 40 years, Midianites give them a hard time. And God gives the people of Israel the strength to beat them up. They could have destroyed them completely, but they just didn't do it. So the Midianites are not strangers to the people of Israel. They are part and parcel of the family of God. That's where we start the story. We start the story of Gideon sitting in a wine press. And a wine press is a hole that people dig into the ground. When you are somebody who harvests rice or wheat, you don't go into a wine press and you clear it off. You are on flat level. Or if not, if you go to India today, where they will beat the wheat is on a hill, because if the wind blows, it will drive away the chaff. But here is Gideon sitting in a wine press. It's a hole, folks. You sit underneath. Because he's so afraid of the Midianites, because they will come and bully him and take the food from them. That's what is happening. So he's sitting down in a wine press beating wheat. And he's sitting down there and he's saying, why has all this happened to us? You know what I told you? Crisis happens. What is the second one? You cry for deliverance, is it right? Chapter 6 starts with the people crying out to God for deliverance. If you get a chance, go back and read. God comes, God sends a prophet, and that prophet comes. And oftentimes when our children make a mistake, instead of getting them out of the problem, you know what you and I say? Remember I told you, don't do that. Yeah? I told you so, isn't it? Vanessa Williams, who was this famous, she was the actress, singer, and she was, I think she was judged as she was a very famous person, and then she became really famous, and then she says in one of her interviews, she says, I had messed up my life. And I was in deep distress. And I didn't know how to get out of it. So I called my parents and I said to them, Dad, Mom, I am in trouble. Can you come and help me? And my parents, who were just ordinary school teachers, and they came to me that day. And when I saw my dad walk up to me, and I looked at him and I said, Dad, I'm so sorry for what I did. And she says, I will never forget what my dad told me. Not once did he look at me and he said, didn't I tell you so? Instead she says, my dad looks at me and says, that's okay, let's go. Let's see how we can solve this problem. This is my greatest desire. When my children mess up and come to me, I hope I don't say to them, I told you so. Because the God that you and I worship looks at you and me and he says, did I tell you so? But instead he says, I'm faithful, let's go. So that's what it happens in chapter 6 when you begin. God comes and he says, look at me, I've been faithful to you, didn't I? When you were in the land of Egypt, when you were crying out to me, I came to you. When you were wandering in the wilderness, I provided for you. You didn't understand, and I told you very simply, when you enter the land and when you make a life, don't do the things that the locals do. Stand up and do something different. Obey me, he says. And then people of Israel have gone back and did the same things that they did. And so Gideon is beating the wine press and he's so upset with God. Because when the angel comes to him and he says, why are you doing this? And he says, remember, if God was with us, why are all these things happening to us? Sometimes you and I take this God so much for granted that because God is in our lives, everything should go well. Somebody sent me a WhatsApp about Artharash. And it said so beautifully. He said he was stricken with AIDS. Is that right? And so somebody asked him, he was a believer, and somebody asked him, why is this happening to you? And then he says, among the millions when God picked me to play Wimbledon and win it, I never asked, why me, Lord? Is that right? Now why do I have to ask it now? Sometimes, folks, because we think we are so close to God, that nothing should happen in our lives. That's exactly what the people of Israel are asking. God, if you were the one who brought us out of Egypt, if you were the one who led us through the wilderness, why are all these things happening to us. Gideon, like you and me, is totally disappointed with this God. And God looks at him and says, "You are a mighty warrior, go." He looks around and says, "Talking to me?" Beyond you and me, while you and I look at our own weakness, God says, "Hey, listen, I know what I can do with you." The God that you and I worship looks beyond us, looks beyond you, and He says, "I see a mighty warrior in you. Why are you discrediting yourself?" And so He says to him, if you are God and if you have come in this fashion, I want to offer something to you. And so He says, "Okay, go and get your stuff and come." So he goes inside, prepares a meal. This is like the same meal that Abraham prepares when he sees the 3 visitors. So he prepares a meal and he brings it to them. And we don't know why this happens. He looks at the sacrifice and he says to place the meat and the loaf of bread on the rock. And he takes a stick and he touches it and it burns. And by this time, Gideon looks at them and says, "Man, you must be God. And I'm glad I did not miss you. In my own ways, if I had looked at you, I would not have recognized you. Thank God that He gave me eyes to recognize you." And so after all of that, Gideon looks at him and he says, "I have seen you, and yet I have not died, and nothing has happened to me." And the angel looks at him and he says, "Peace be to you. Peace be to you." And then Gideon offers an altar, and he calls the altar Jehovah Shalom. God is peace. So this is the thought I want to leave with you. When Abraham took Isaac as an offering to the Mount Moriah, he goes up the top of the mountain and Isaac looks at him and says, "Dad, the wood is here. Everything is here. Where is the lamb?" And Abraham looks at him with such confidence in his eyes. He says, "The Lord will provide. On that mountain, the Lord will provide." Even when he leaves his servants behind, and the servants looks at him and he says, "You be here, my son and I are going, and after we worship God, we will return." Is that right? What confidence in this God. And so he goes to that mountain, and for sure, God provides for him, isn't it? And that word that is used is Jehovah Jireh. God will provide. But in Hebrew, it's not God will provide. God will see to it that your needs are met. Is that right? God made sure that Abraham's needs were met. And so when Abraham builds the altar, he calls that altar Jehovah Jireh. But when Gideon builds this altar, he doesn't call and he says, "I'm building this altar because you are God victorious." No, he says, "You are God who gives me peace." And I looked at that text and I asked that same question. Why is Gideon calling an altar of peace? Why isn't he saying, and he's building an altar, even victory has come into his life, isn't it? How many times you and I build altars after we have tasted victory? Yeah. When things have gone well in our lives, right? When things have worked perfectly in our lives, then we build an altar. But here is Gideon building an altar even before things have beginning to put in place. Here is God reassuring him, "Guess what, Gideon? I'm God, peace." Maybe the peace that God is offering to him is not so much, "I'll be okay, I'll be calm." That I don't think, sometimes we think of peace as God providing this calm in the midst of our strife. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's God reminding us that peace is much bigger than this, isn't it? Maybe God is reminding us this morning, it's easy for us to cry out to God in the midst of our crisis. But if we can learn to lift our eyes to God almost every day of our lives, if we can desire God's peace in our lives almost every day, then it becomes such a practice in our life. When crisis comes, we know who to go to. We really know who is this God of peace. Maybe that's what God is reminding us this morning. Folks, it's easier to come to God in the midst of your crisis. Very hard to come to God when things are going bad. But if you and I know how to make that as a practice, crisis will come. Crisis will happen. This God that you and I worship will be Jehovah Shalom. Amen.
Amen.
As I pray with you, whatever your situation is, wherever God is leading you, if you will trust God a little bit more, you will say to God, God, in the midst of where I am, reveal yourself as Jehovah Shalom. A God who desires peace more than we want for ourselves. So God, we lift our hearts before you. We say to you, may the God who grants us peace be our portion this day.